We begin this series with a quote, "Live for the clan," said by a father to his son. It meant that he should just stay on his brother's side like a shadow. We now turn to a group of knights, with weary armor and swords in the ground. They stood frozen before a harsh wind. Another person appears, dressed in all black and without armor, while being on his knees before the silver knights. Someone walks to him, calling what he sees as a priceless sight. The man in black, who was kneeling, had blood dripping from his head and mouth as he tried to look up to see who was speaking to him. As numerous other knights show painful expressions on their faces, the voice continues to speak as he couldn't believe that a knight was fighting off the continent's strongest commanders on his own. The voice belonged to a man with a ponytail, who bravely stood in front of the other commanders, telling the man in black that he was impressed, which was to be expected because of who his brother is. It is revealed that the man in black is called Cyan Vert, who finally looks up and recognizes the man making fun of him as Boris, who could only give the evil eye as he continues to laugh at Cyan's situation. Summoning a weapon from the darkness aura, Cyan asks him about who made him do this. His first thought was the Emperor as he took a fighting stance against Boris, wielding 2 daggers in his hands. But as Cyan released his dark aura, Boris could feel it and felt disgusted by it as it was exactly what the rumors said it was going to be. Unleashing a blood-red fury aura, Cyan covers himself in it as Boris reveals that Cyan is an assassin from Mist. Boris reveals that Mist is an organization that is like fog to their Knights of Light. He was going to report this to the higher-ups after getting rid of Cyan, who he sees as an impure being that was affiliated with heathens. Hearing those words, Cyan urges him to go ahead, as he promises Boris that he wasn't going to have a mouth after this, and that not even his teeth would remain after he was done with him. But Boris still felt confident as he tells Cyan to give up if he intends on using his secret power, as there was a 9th-star magic barrier casted where he was. Cyan hears this and starts to think of a way to escape his current situation in order to reveal to his own brother about who the actual culprit was. Filled with a new purpose, Cyan was ready to go all out. A barrier? Means nothing to him now, as he was going to shred it to bits. But before he could do anything, another voice appeared, telling him that this was enough. A figure wearing golden armor walks by Boris, who bows his head and shows respect. Looking at the figure approaching, Cyan's face could only be filled with dismay as he realizes who it was. The quote from the beginner, "Live for the clan," told by Cyan's father, came to his mind in the middle of his current situation. His father also told him that his brother Ashel is by extension the clan, meaning to say that Ashel Vert's success is Cyan Vert's success. It turns out that this blonde man in the golden armor was Cyan's very own brother, Ashel Vert. Seeing him here, Cyan felt dizzy and confused, but he slowly understood that the culprit behind what was happening to him was his own brother Ashel. Cyan could only drop to his knees once again after realizing the shocking truth. Looking at his own brother, Ashel could see that Cyan was confused about why he was here. Still covered in his black and red aura, silence fell upon the brothers as they gaze upon one another. Cyan could only muster the courage to ask him face to face about what was going on. Ashel, with a cold look on his face, simply tells his brother that he had carried out his duties well. For the clan, and for the people, and lastly for him personally. Cyan's aura started to erupt strongly after hearing those words from his own brother. Ashel reveals that he was going to remove the burden from his shoulders. But Cyan was still confused, asking him about whether he had done something wrong. Looking at the ominous fog-like aura surrounding Cyan's body, Ashel tells him that he was nothing more than a murderer, a person that he couldn't even call human anymore. He declares and shouts for everyone that Cyan had fooled them for long enough, and couldn't believe that he was unaware of his own sins. The words murderer and sins echoed through Cyan's head, bringing forth a new wave of rage as his eyes regained its fire. His anger was exploding towards his brother, as Cyan wondered what the hell he was talking about. The succession fight within the Empire, the Demon King army's raid, the war to unify the continent. Cyan had helped Ashel achieve all that he began, because serving him was his life. But now, his own brother was abandoning him, even though Cyan had worked like a dog for 20 years under him. As his fog-like aura started to explode even more, blood began to spill from Cyan's body. But he ignores the pain, focusing on his anger. It doesn't matter to him now if his entire body breaks down. He was going to give everything he had right now, if it means that he could destroy the very brother he was tasked to serve. Unleashing a monster-like amount of fog-like aura, the commanders that surrounded Cyan were shocked to see that he had so much strength left, making them think of him as inhuman. With a new demonic form that covers his face, Cyan took a fighting stance against his own brother, calling out the fact that the hero was trying to kill his younger brother, just because he was scared. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself, brother?" Those words seemed to hurt a spot as Ashel's face appeared annoyed with veins popping at the side of his head. Cyan starts the fight by charging at him straight away, but Ashel easily deflects and blocks all of his sneak attacks. As he continued to run around Ashel, Cyan thought to himself that all he needed was one hit. Just one hit would be enough for him. So he charges back in, believing that he can stab Ashel's weak point so that he couldn't regenerate. But as he attempted another attack, Ashel blocked it with a golden spell shield. Even with his back turned against Cyan, who was surprised to see the sudden golden spell block. Looking past Ashel, Cyan spots that it was the doing of Boris. As he lets his guard down for a moment, Ashel calls him a poor bastard before stabbing him through his stomach, causing Cyan to drop his precious dagger. With his sword deep inside his brother, Ashel tells him that he wanted to give him a painless death since they were brothers, but after what he did, Cyan had shown them his true colors. It proved what Ashel thought from the start, that Cyan was a demon. And that he was glad that he had never trusted his brother to begin with. Those words cut deeper than the sword as Cyan's demonic aura slowly disappears, revealing his speechless face. With a simple kick, he was knocked down to the ground. Sensing that the fight was over, Ashel left him lying on the ground by himself as he walked back, telling Boris that they were leaving now. Cyan couldn't move at all, as his blood continued to spill everywhere. He could only curse in his mind as he looked to the sky. Thinking that this was the end of his life, he couldn't believe the foolish life that he had lived so far. His eyes started to lose their light as he slowly closed them, ending by calling his life right now stupid. But as Ashel made his way back, something from the back caught his attention. It turns out to be Cyan, who was giving it his all in his final moments. He screams out with all his might, "Die!" As he swung his dagger right to Ashel's throat, but a golden wave of light disintegrated our boy into nothing, leaving Ashel perfectly fine. Soon enough, a voice was screaming for young Master Cyan. A young boy awakens with sweat dripping down his face as he grips his neck while breathing hard. A woman wearing a maid uniform appears by his side, scolding him for sleeping so long and reminding him that he needed to get it together and to get ready. "Emily," shouted Cyan with a mix of shock and confusion in his voice, scaring the poor young maid as he questions her on how she was here. But then something catches Cyan's attention. He recalled that it had almost been 20 years since he last saw her, and yet, looking at her current appearance, she looked exactly the same from the last time he saw her. Looking at the room behind her, Cyan notices that this place was the room he used to live in when he was younger. The furniture arrangement was the same too. Touching his face rapidly and everywhere, Cyan was shocked to learn that he had returned back to being a child. But as he continues to be stunned by this new information, Emily calls out to him once again. She looks at him with an interested face, believing that he was stalling for time because he didn't want to go for training again, but she tells him to make up his mind and get going. Cyan was confused by the sudden training as he couldn't remember exactly what the training was he had before. We are now in the Vert clan duchy. Looking at tall buildings surrounding him, Cyan was now certain that he was back at home and in the past. He was still panicking, wondering if what he was experiencing was the event where your life flashes before your eyes before death. He could even remember the exact moment this was, 27 years ago, Foundation Year 985 March 1st Street. It was a year before he entered the academy. Every year, the duchy holds a duel training session. His father, who is the owner of the duchy, Duke Vert, attends the event, making it a very big deal. His opponent back then was his half-brother, Cyan Vert, who was the same age as Cyan. His mother, Margaret Erzeth, is the Duke's wife. Thanks to that, Cyan received a lot more attention despite the fact that they were both the youngest. Ouch, look at him. Cyan was the bastardized son, and after being mocked in this fight, he became a laughingstock to everyone. Seeing his weak state, the Duke tells Cyan to not do anything from now on. This duel was the reason why his father stopped paying any attention to him too. Right now, they are starting the duel. Cyan was kind of pissed off as Emily suggests to him that he should just surrender instead. He couldn't believe that even a maid was looking down on him. But as he drew his weapon, he noticed something. He could feel that the rapier he was holding was quite heavy, meaning that his strength was the same as he had when he was at this age. But the feeling he was getting from holding the rapier made it hard for him to think that this was a dream or his life flashing before his eyes, as he had never heard of a magic spell that was capable of creating such a strong illusion either. All of the things he experienced so far started to make Cyan think that he was actually back in the past. Ashel was on stage as well, commenting about how Cyan didn't run off yet. Choosing to ignore the idiot's words, Cyan looks around again, thinking that maybe he could change the future. The Duke finally raises his hand, announcing the start of the duel between the half-brothers. Ashel made the first move, charging head first. He shouted at Cyan, asking him about where he was looking. Believing that this was going to be an easy win, Ashel causally raises his sword to attack while laughing to himself. But our boy was calm as a gentle breeze. Watching his half-brothers attack, he could only think of him as a snail. With a simple sidestep, Ashel's first attack was easily dodged as he missed. Calling his dodging a coward's move, Ashel moves to attack once again. But this time, Cyan was faster. With a single swing of his rapier, he knocked Ashel's sword out of his hand and into the air. And with another quick kick to his shin, causing Ashel to experience tremendous pain as shown on his ugly face. Ashel could only curl up in a ball on the ground, holding the shin that Cyan had kicked while screaming in pain. His mother was shocked to witness what happened to her son while the Duke was simply staring and thinking in silence. Demon time. Cyan was looking at Ashel lying pathetically on the ground, thinking that if he just puts the sword against his throat, then the duel would be over. But Cyan stops himself from doing so, as he knew that this wasn't enough. He recalled back that when he was at this age, Kranz had always bullied him as his form of entertainment, and the bullying didn't stop at home, it continued all the way into the academy too. So Cyan decided that in this moment, he needed to really stomp the shit out of Kranz so that he would never try to do anything to him again. And so he walks over to Kranz, determined that in this life, he was going to now pave a path for himself. Kranz could only watch in horror over what Cyan was going to do to him. This is what happens when you mess with the main characters or when younger siblings try to go up against the older siblings. The result was obvious. Kranz had lost the duel. At the end, the Duke had ordered for Cyan to see him, and even freed his schedule to do so. This made Cyan wonder if his victory in the duel was that impressive. Looking at the huge knight beside him, Cyan knew him as the high-class knight Yulkin, who was directly affiliated with the Duke, is now escorting our boy. But as they walked through the hallways of the duchy, we met Kranz's mother. Cyan could see her facial expression, which looked like she stepped into shit as she was probably talking to the Duke about her son. So he decides to tease the mother by asking her how Kranz was. His simple question was enough to annoy her as she scolds Cyan for his audacity to ask such a question after beating his half-brother like that. But our boy happily walks past her, explaining that Kranz's state was how duels were done. But as he left, she mentions that bastard children shouldn't be treated like legitimate children. This was enough to cause Cyan to stop in his tracks. The hoe continues to insult Cyan, saying it was like mother and son since his mother was a dirty whore, and that he should be on the streets begging for food instead. Those words trigger the inner demon of Cyan, as his eyes glowed bright red. The hoe had officially crossed the line. A single thought came across his mind: should I kill her? But he stops himself from doing so. With a smile on his face, Cyan knew better than anyone on how to make her suffer. He was planning to torture her, slowly, like painstaking slowly. As he turns to the hoe, he reminds her that he was going to the academy along with Kranz, which grabs her attention. With murder in his eyes, Cyan threatens her with the fact that Kranz won't be graduating with all of his limbs intact. She senses the threat behind what he said and immediately raises her hand, hoping to slap Cyan for his words. But Yulkin uses his arm to cover Cyan, who smiles at this reaction, as he apologizes to the Duchess. He tells her that the Duke had called for Cyan with urgency and that they couldn't delay the meeting anymore. With a fierce look in his eyes, Yulkin bids the Duchess farewell, leaving her speechless as she could only watch the two of them leave her sight. Cyan was laughing to himself because he knew that the Duke's orders were absolute. And right now, he was being protected by the guard knight who was given that order. A knight who won't submit even to the Duke's wife was pretty nice to have and reliable. Soon, a voice tells the Cyan to come on. It was the Duke, who was gazing out the window. Cyan bows his head as a sign of respect, greeting his father and recalling that it had almost been 15 years since they had met one-on-one. The Duke of the clan, the man known as Regressed Vert. The great feudal lord of Velyas, a western feud of the Yushif Empire. But the world calls him by a different name. He was known as the guardian of the continent. The hero who stopped the invasion of demons for a long time. With the help of his remarkable magic power and worldly wisdom, this man shouldered a responsibility no one compelled on him, until his very death in the battle against the invasion of the Demon King's army. All this man wanted was there to be peace in the entirety of the continent. But Cyan's memories of him were different. He sees the man before him, someone who utilized his free will, decided on living his whole life serving others, as a simple stupid man. As they sat before each other, the Duke commented on the fact that he noticed that Cyan's eyes had precisely followed the sword of Kranz and dodged it. bringing Cyan to be confused for a moment. The Duke recounted the moment when Kranz ran to him, and yet he looked straight at the path of the swinging sword, and turned his body to dodge it. Which made the Duke question when Cyan had learned to wield a sword. Cyan could see how sharp his father was, so he gave the excuse that he didn't learn it but simply practiced on his own every night. But from what his father knew, Cyan had never shown any interest in swordsmanship, so it made him wonder why he would hide such excellent skills. Cyan replies that he didn't want to catch the people's attention, but despite that, he had actually gone all out in order to take down and beat the shit out of Kranz. Which made his father wonder once again, if the beating at the end of the duel was needed. Cyan could sense a different intention behind his father's words, and felt that he wanted to get a certain reply. So Cyan goes along with it, revealing to his father that he just wanted to prove himself. To prove that he was better than Kranz even though they share the same blood, he could see the meaning behind the duel. His reply causes his father to laugh for a while, before calling Cyan's response as excellent, a clear and concise answer that shows off his level-headedness. He was delighted over the fact that his son was so talented. He was sure that Cyan would become a great and reliable support for Ashel one day. Those words triggered the trauma within Cyan, who immediately froze after hearing what his father had said. He recalls the moment that Ashel had stabbed him and ended his life, so why would he become his helper again? Looking at his father's eyes, Cyan could see that in this life, it was the same as always, his father was still as obsessed as ever with Ashel. As his father tells him that he was going to give him anything he wanted as a reward for winning the duel, Cyan was determined now to destroy everything. Everything that Ashel had wanted to do, and so, with a determined look on his face, Cyan declares to his father what he wants. We now turn to a shocked Emily, who discovered that Cyan's reward was to enter the battlefront. She was going crazy, shouting at Cyan, who was calmly sitting on his bed, about if he knew what kind of place the battlefront was. She could recall that it was a place swarming with wicked and terrifying demonic beasts all over the place. Velyas, the western feud of the Yushif Empire. This is the only place in the entire continent to be called a battlefront. Even in that, the Lamia Valley, that can be called the front line, is a ferocious battlefield where the battles with demons have been going on for hundreds of years. Because of that, Cyan's father, who stubbornly opposed it from the start, gave him a condition. To become worthy of going to Lamia Valley within 1 month. This condition causes our boy to think about what his father meant by being worthy. But right now, his main goal is to raise his physical strength as much as possible in the time he has been given, since he was still weaker than his peers. Luckily, he still had the same combat sense as he had before regressing, as seen from the duel with Kranz. He could also sense the little amount of magic within himself. So if he trains his body according to his strengths, Cyan could make good use of it. So he decides to train starting from today. But as he was deep in his thoughts, the door to his room suddenly burst open, with a loud voice calling out for Cyan. A blue-haired lady had entered the room with a stick look on her face. It turns out to be Alice. She immediately grabs onto Cyan's collar, dragging him across the room while shaking his head furiously, asking him if he was crazy, while Emily calmly greets the young miss with a smile on her face. It turns out that Alice had found out that he had asked father to send him to the battlefront. After smacking him around and laying him on the ground, Alice tells him that defeating Kranz had gotten to his head, which cannot do. So she tells him to follow her to the rooftop. Late at night, we now see the siblings gathered at the rooftop as mentioned before. Cyan was carrying his rapier with him this time, as well as Alice carrying her own weapon. It turns out to be another duel, as Alice announces that they would start when they draw their swords, and that she would only allow Cyan to go to the battlefront if he can endure her attacks for 3 minutes. But Cyan wasn't happy with this, asking his sister if she really had to go this far. But she ignores his words, only wanting to know his answer to one question. With a serious look in her eyes, she asks Cyan if he was after the family's title. Hearing that, Cyan wondered if she was doing this because of that, but he was actually not even interested in the family title. Hearing no reply from him, Alice concluded that he was interested in it, and demanded Cyan to draw his sword. He reluctantly pulls out his rapier, thinking about how tiring and chaotic it was today, since it hasn't even been that long since his duel with Kranz. But much to his surprise, Alice makes the first move by charging forward without any warning. But Cyan was easily able to block her first strike, surprising Alice, as she couldn't believe that a 10-year-old could block her attack that easily. Cyan, on the other hand, was questioning in his mind about why his sister is going all out against her own brother, who is 7 years younger. Sensing that her attack failed, Alice backs away for a moment. She knew that a rapier has a very light blade, and yet, Cyan was able to parry off her longsword attack. As seen from her hand trembling. Thinking that he was just lucky this time, Alice started to get pissed off over how well Cyan's intuition is. Cyan started to sense the danger from his sister, and realized that based on her face, he was screwed. And so, the two siblings continued to exchange blows with one another, attacking and deflecting together throughout the night. This time, Alice takes a different stance to attack, but Cyan manages to block it with the handle of his rapier. Sensing a chance, he uses Alice's strike against her, causing her longsword to slide off his rapier, allowing him the chance to take her neck. Much to Alice's surprise, but as his blade reaches close to her neck, Cyan was actually trying to stop his own attack. He twists his rapier in the end, allowing for Alice to block his attack at the last moments. Separating the two siblings, as he landed on top of a nearby pillar, Cyan was breathing hard, thinking that his attack would have really been bad if he hadn't twisted his sword halfway through, or else he would have killed his own sister. It turns out that his attack style was based on the mist swordsmanship skill, Thick Fog, which mostly consists of skills meant to kill immediately. It was hard for him to fight right now without killing since he was lacking in strength. But right now, he was more focused on how much remaining time is left out of the 3 minutes since they started this duel. His arm was trembling while holding his rapier, since he was compensating for his weak strength by imbuing the sword with his mana, and yet, right now, Cyan was near his limit. Alice was also breathing hard, but this time, she was chanting something under her breath. "Earth, wind, come to me and act as my sword." Shock appeared onto Cyan's face as he realized that his sister was casting a 6-star magic. Alice took another stance, like a wild beast, but this time, her longsword was sparking bright blue. She was using the spell Aqua Blade. He couldn't believe that she was going this far, making Cyan wonder if she was planning on killing him. Looking into her eyes, he knew that it was over for him as Alice was chanting the words, I can't lose," under her breath repeatedly. Cyan decided to change the way he held his rapier, knowing that if he blocked her attack now, he would simply fall out of the castle. So he decides on another plan, trusting and believing that it would work. Our boy charges fearlessly towards Alice, who was casting a bright blue attack towards him. As he prepares another attack, Cyan was hoping for someone to come out as Alice prepares to strike him down with her 6-star magic attack. Cyan's plan worked as Yulkin appeared out of the blue between them, shouting at both siblings to stop. He grabs Cyan with one arm while using his other arm to block Alice's attack with his sword, causing her attack to fly upwards into the skies, lighting it blue everywhere. Easily stopping them from hurting one another. The first thing he did was to call out to Alice, warning her that she was being too harsh against an opponent that was much younger than her. Cyan was glad to see that Yulkin was here to stop her attack. While Alice finally regained her mind, she immediately hugs her younger brother, apologizing for losing her mind for a moment there. As she cried on his shoulder, she revealed to Cyan that she wanted to stop him from going to the battlefield and was too obsessed with her goal. Seeing her this way, Cyan could only smile as he knew that this was how she was like. A person that always tries so hard with everything. His sister, Alice, was the elite of the elites who got an S in all subjects in the Royal Academy where all the talented children gathered, whether they be talented in swordsmanship, magic or other fields of study. On top of that, her beauty was astounding, so people called her God's child. From a young age, she was trained in swordsmanship. She was mentioned as being the future guardian of the continent, along with the oldest son, Cyan Vert. But not long after joining the Knights of Light, she was killed. As he held her with his own hands, Cyan recalled how much he missed her, and swore to protect her in this life. As the siblings hugged one another, Alice turned to Yulkin, asking him about why he was here since he was their father's guardian knight, and that the Duke had just left for the war. Yulkin reveals that he was following the Duke's orders to protect Cyan for a while. He couldn't tell them since he was supposed to carry it out in secret. But Cyan could feel Yulkin's presence since he left the Duke's office, but as he started to wonder why his father would give Yulkin the secret order, his eyes started to close. Alice notices that he had actually fallen asleep in her eyes, bringing a sign of relief to her as she realizes that Cyan was still like a little kid. The next day, Alice returned to the academy, since she had returned for just a bit to see father before her graduation. Cyan was now doing push-ups in his room, to strengthen himself. He needed to become stronger, so he had been focusing on strength training for the past 2 weeks. But up to now, his maximum number of push-ups was 10. He had hit this wall for the past 2 weeks. In his previous life, Cyan was pretty confident in his strength, look at that body, but right now, he was super weak. As he rested from his training, Emily appeared to inform him that a package from Alice had arrived. But her face was filled with disgust as she held the package with just 2 fingers. It turns out to be the hellhound's blood that Cyan had asked Alice to get for him. It was a rare item that can only be found in Lamia Valley, but he figured that the black market would have it. As he poured the blood into a bowl, the blood of the demonic beasts is considered poisonous because of its sickening smell, as well as the feeling of burning upon drinking it. The blood had the effect of actually permanently increasing the mana and strength of the person who consumes it. But most people thought that it was fake news. But Cyan knew it was true based on his personal experience. As he held the bowl near his face, Emily asked if he was really going to drink it. Without hesitation, Cyan one-shots it. After all, compared to Emily's cooking, Cyan has been the only person to be eating it, even though his heart stopped for a moment after taking a single bite of what was supposed to be mushroom soup. Compared to that purple goo, the bloodhound's blood tasted fantastic. Feeling the effects of the blood, Cyan stands up with a reddish aura around his body. He looks at Emily with bright red eyes, telling her that he was going for a walk in order to see if the effects of the blood was working. Now in a different place, Cyan gazes back at the duchy, recalling that it's been a while since he was here. He had been waiting for this day for the last 2 weeks. The moment when Yulkin was not here for his regular reports, this was a place that Cyan had often come to when he wanted to be alone. Then one day, Ashel received a divine revelation from the god of light, Lumendil. It is said that an ancient temple is hidden somewhere in these mountains where Cyan is right now. But he didn't really fully believe it, but there was really a place where the flow of mana was concentrated. Cyan was scanning the ground before the divine revelation had arrived. Because right now, he was the only one that knew about this place. Using his mist aura, he destroys the area where the flow of mana was concentrated. He smiles to himself after the destruction, knowing that Ashel would never imagine what Cyan was doing right now. After destroying the ground, it reveals a staircase that leads underground to a bright light.
Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.